The great crystal halls of Nexus Prime had not seen such a gathering in 300 years. Representatives from across the galaxy filled the massive chambers, their varied forms creating a rainbow of colors and shapes that stretched as far as the eye could see. The Corvani delegation stood tall on their 6 legs, their metallic skin reflecting the blue light from the crystal walls. The Etherians floated in their energy bubbles, their translucent forms shimmering like living ghosts. Hundreds of other species filled the remaining spaces, all here for the same purpose. The Tri-Century Assembly was the most important event in galactic politics. Every 300 standard years, the Galactic Council gathered to review the state of their civilization. They discussed trade agreements, settled territorial disputes, and planned for the future. It was a time when the galaxy came together as one. Junior Archivist Kethmar of the Velian species sat in the back corner of the historical record section. Her purple skin was marked with the intricate tattoos that showed her rank and education. She had spent the last 20 years preparing for this moment, cataloging and organizing the vast database of galactic history. Every species, every world, every major event in recorded history passed through her careful review. But something was wrong. Kethmar stared at her display screen, her large eyes blinking in confusion. There were gaps in the database, not the usual small errors or corrupted files that happened over centuries of data transfer. These were deliberate deletions, clean cuts in the historical record that left behind only fragments. The fragments all pointed to the same thing: references to a species called humans and a world designated as Terra or Earth. The dates were old, nearly 800 standard years ago. But the references made no sense. They spoke of trade agreements with a species that did not exist. They mentioned diplomatic contacts with a world that was not in any current star maps. Most disturbing of all were the technical specifications. Brief mentions of technologies that sounded impossible, ships that could travel faster than anything in the current galaxy, weapons that could crack planets, manufacturing techniques that could build entire space stations in weeks instead of decades. Kethmar tried to access the full records, but every path led to the same message. File corrupted. Data unavailable. It was as if someone had gone through the entire galactic database and carefully removed every trace of this mysterious species. She spent days digging deeper, using every tool and technique she had learned in her training. Slowly, piece by piece, she began to find more fragments, hidden in backup systems, buried in the personal logs of long-dead ambassadors, scattered across a dozen different archives. The picture that emerged terrified her. 800 years ago, there had been something called the Purge Wars. The fragments spoke of massive battles that had consumed entire star systems. They mentioned something called the Silence Directive, and a species that had been declared too dangerous to exist. But the most frightening discovery came when she found a single intact log entry, buried so deep in the archives that it had been forgotten by the deletion protocols. It was written by someone called High Counselor Vethran, one of the founders of the current galactic government. The entry was brief but chilling. The human problem has been resolved. The species has been contained within their home system. All records are to be purged. All memory of their existence is to be eliminated. If future generations ever discover them, they must understand. We did what we had to do. They were becoming too powerful, too dangerous. Let the stars forget their name. For if they ever return, we pray to the void that we are not here to witness it. Kethmar sat back in her chair, her hands shaking. This was not just ancient history. This was a cover-up on a galactic scale. An entire species had been erased from memory, hidden away somewhere in the galaxy for 8 centuries. She knew she should report her findings to her supervisor, but something told her that would be a mistake. Instead, she decided to go directly to the top. High Counselor Zeftai was one of the oldest beings in the galaxy, an Etherian who had lived for over 1,000 years. If anyone would know the truth, it would be him. Kethmar found Zeftai in his private chamber, floating in his energy bubble as he reviewed the day's proceedings. She had never spoken directly to a High Counselor before, and her voice trembled as she approached. "Honored Counselor," she began, "I have discovered something in the archives that requires your attention." Zeftai's glowing form turned toward her. "Junior Archivist Kethmar, is it not? What have you found that is so important it cannot wait for proper channels?" Kethmar took a deep breath and activated her portable display. The fragments and references appeared in the air between them. I have found evidence of a species that has been deliberately erased from our records. They were called humans, and they came from a world called Earth or Terra. The records suggest they were involved in something called the Purge Wars 800 years ago. The effect on Zeftai was immediate and shocking. The ancient being's energy form flickered and dimmed, as if he had been struck by a physical blow. For a moment, he seemed unable to speak. "Where did you find this?" he whispered, his voice barely audible. "Scattered throughout the archives, honored counselor. Someone tried to delete all references, but they missed fragments in backup systems and personal logs. I believe an entire species has been hidden from galactic knowledge." Zeftai was quiet for a long time. When he finally spoke, his voice carried a weight that Kethmar had never heard before. "You will classify all of these findings at the highest security level," he said. "You will speak of this to no one. You will continue no further research into this matter. That is not a request, Junior Archivist. That is a direct order from the High Council. But honored counselor, if there is an entire species, there is no species." Zeftai's voice boomed through the chamber. "There never was. You found nothing but corrupted data and computer errors. Do I make myself clear?" Kethmar bowed her head. "Yes, honored counselor. I understand," but she did not understand. And as she left Zeftai's chamber, she made a decision that would change the galaxy forever. She would continue her research, but in secret. She would find the truth about the humans and their lost world. It took her 3 weeks to break through the final layers of encryption protecting the most classified archives. What she found there made her previous discoveries seem insignificant. The truth was worse than she had imagined. The humans had not been some primitive species that had been eliminated in a simple war. They had been the most advanced civilization the galaxy had ever seen. In just a few decades after first contact, they had revolutionized galactic technology, politics, and society. And they had been destroyed not because they were aggressive or dangerous, but because they were too successful. The established powers of the galaxy had seen them as a threat to the existing order and had united to eliminate them. But the final log entry, written by the original High Council after the wars had ended, contained information that made Kethmar's blood run cold. The humans have retreated to their home system and activated some form of concealment technology. All scans show the Sol system is dead and empty, but we know they are still there. The peace treaty is in effect. They will remain hidden and we will not pursue them, but we must never forget what they are capable of. If they ever emerge from their self-imposed exile, if they ever return to the galaxy, we can only pray that time has made them more merciful than we were. 3 days after Kethmar read those words, the deep space monitoring stations detected something impossible. Energy signatures were appearing in the direction of what the star charts called the Sol system. A system that, according to all official records, contained nothing but dead worlds and empty space. The system that had been silent for 800 years was waking up. Admiral Thexler of the Corvani Deep Fleet had commanded ships for over 2 centuries, but he had never received a report like this one. His tactical officer, a young Corvani named Vextar, stood before him with obvious fear in his metallic features. "Admiral, the deep space sensors are showing impossible readings from grid section 7749, Vextar reported, his voice shaking slightly. "Thermal signatures, electromagnetic activity, and what appears to be massive construction projects throughout the entire system." Thexler looked at the data streaming across his command screens. Grid section 7749 was what the star charts called the Sol system. According to every official record, it was empty space containing nothing but dead worlds and cosmic debris. Ships had been sent to scout the area dozens of times over the centuries, and all had reported the same thing. Nothing there but silence. "Run the scans again," Thexler ordered. "Check all equipment for malfunctions." 20 minutes later, Vextar returned with the same impossible data. Not only were the readings consistent, but they were getting stronger. Whatever was in the Sol system was not trying to hide anymore. Thexler immediately sent an encrypted message to Fleet Command. The response came back within hours. "Maintain current position. Do not investigate. Await further orders," but further orders never came. Days passed, then weeks, and the activity in the Sol system continued to increase. Ships began appearing on the sensors. Massive constructions that dwarfed anything in the current galactic fleet. Whatever was happening in that forgotten system was far beyond anything in recorded history. Finally, Thexelor made a decision that would define the rest of his life. He gathered his most trusted officers and explained the situation. "We are going to investigate Grid Section 7749, he announced. "I know this goes against our orders, but something is happening that could affect the entire galaxy. We need to know what we are dealing with." The journey to the Sol system took 12 days at maximum warp. As they approached, the crew grew more amazed and terrified with each passing hour. The sensor readings that had seemed impossible at long range were revealed to be conservative estimates. The Sol system was not just inhabited. It was the most advanced civilization any of them had ever imagined. Massive orbital rings circled the third planet, structures so large they could be seen clearly from the edge of the system. Space elevators stretched from the planet's surface into the void, carrying a constant stream of cargo and personnel. The asteroid belt between the fourth and fifth planets had been completely converted into a vast network of mining facilities and manufacturing plants. But it was not just the third planet that had been developed. Every world in the system showed signs of massive construction. The fourth planet glowed red with atmospheric processors working to create a breathable environment. The moons of the gas giants housed floating cities that rode the upper atmospheres like living organisms. Even the smallest asteroids had been converted to some purpose. "How is this possible?" Vextar whispered as they watched the data stream across their screens. "The energy requirements alone should be impossible. They are using more power than our entire civilization produces." Thexelor studied the readings with growing amazement and fear. This was not the work of a primitive species struggling to survive. This was the product of centuries of uninterrupted development by a civilization that had mastered technologies the rest of the galaxy could barely imagine. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "I am detecting massive construction facilities hidden throughout the asteroid fields. They appear to be shipyards, but the vessels they are building do not match any known design in our databases." Thexelor ordered the ship closer, using every stealth technology at their disposal to avoid detection. What they found in the hidden shipyards made their previous discoveries seem small. The ships under construction were unlike anything in galactic history. They were not just larger than current vessels. They seemed to exist partially outside of normal space. Parts of their hulls flickered in and out of visibility, as if they were moving through dimensions that other species could not perceive. Energy readings from their power cores suggested they could generate more force than entire battle fleets. "These are not exploration vessels," Thexelor realized. "These are weapons of war. But designed to fight what enemy?" The answer came 3 days later when they intercepted a transmission from the planet's surface. The message was brief, but it sent a chill through every member of the crew. It was broadcast in perfect galactic standard, the common language used by all civilized species. But Galactic Standard had been developed centuries after this system had supposedly gone dark. There was no way an isolated species could have learned it, unless they had never been isolated at all. Countdown to awakening. 14 days. 7 hours, 23 minutes, the transmission said in a calm, emotionless voice. "All systems operational. The silence ends soon." Thexelor immediately called for a full tactical assessment. His officers worked around the clock, analyzing every piece of data they had collected. The picture that emerged was terrifying. The beings in this system had not just survived 8 centuries of isolation. They had thrived beyond anything the galaxy had ever seen. Their technology was so advanced that it seemed to violate the basic laws of physics. Their industrial capacity could produce more ships and weapons in a year than the entire galactic fleet possessed. Most frightening of all, they had been watching the galaxy the entire time. The perfect knowledge of Galactic Standard was proof that they had been monitoring communications, studying the political situation, learning everything about the civilizations that surrounded them. "Admiral," his intelligence officer reported, "I have been analyzing the construction patterns and energy outputs. Based on what we have observed, I estimate that this civilization could defeat the combined military forces of the entire galaxy without significant effort." Thexelor nodded grimly. He had reached the same conclusion. Whatever species lived in this system, they possessed the power to conquer or destroy every other civilization in known space. But the question that haunted him was why they had waited so long. If they possessed such overwhelming power, why had they remained hidden for 8 centuries? The answer came when his communications officer detected another transmission. this one heavily encrypted and directed toward the galactic core. It took their best computer systems 2 days to decode it, but when they did, the message was clear. We remember everything. Every world you burned, every colony you destroyed, every child you murdered. 800 years we have waited. 800 years we have prepared. The debts will be paid in full. That night, Thexilor sent an emergency message to Fleet Command and the Galactic Council. He broke every regulation about stealth missions and deep space reconnaissance. He transmitted everything they had discovered, every reading they had taken, every image they had recorded. The message was simple. We have found them, the species from the old records. They are not extinct. They have been waiting, and they are coming. As his ship prepared to leave the Sol system, Thexilor took one last look at the massive civilization that had grown in the darkness. The orbital rings around the third planet pulsed with energy. The shipyards worked around the clock-building vessels of unimaginable power. The entire system hummed with activity as 8 centuries of preparation reached their final stages. In 11 days, according to the countdown they had intercepted, the silence would end. The galaxy was about to remember what it had tried so hard to forget, and Thexilor knew with absolute certainty that when that day came, nothing would ever be the same again. The emergency session of the Galactic Council had been called within hours of receiving Admiral Thexilor's report. The great crystal halls of Nexus Prime, which had been filled with celebration just weeks before, now echoed with fear and panic. High Counselor Zeftai floated at the center of the assembly, his ancient energy form dimmer than usual. Around him, representatives from hundreds of species demanded answers. The Corvani delegation stood in tight formation, their metallic features reflecting their anger. The Etherians flickered nervously in their energy bubbles. Even the usually calm Velians showed signs of distress. "You must tell us the truth," demanded Fleet Marshal Korthax of the Corvani Military Command. "Our deep space reconnaissance has confirmed the impossible. There is a massive civilization in the Sol system, possessing technology that surpasses our own by centuries. Who are they? How did they get there?" Zeftai had dreaded this moment for 800 years. He had hoped it would never come, that the ancient agreements would hold forever. But the countdown that Admiral Thexilor had intercepted left him no choice. The time for secrets was over. "I will tell you," Zeftai said, his voice carrying across the vast chamber, "but you will not like what you hear. The truth is that we created the situation through our own fear and hatred." The chamber fell silent. Representatives leaned forward to hear every word. 800 years ago, Zeftai began, we made first contact with a species that called themselves humans. They came from the third planet of the Sol system, which they called Earth. At the time, they were young and primitive. Their technology was barely advanced enough for interstellar travel. A murmur went through the assembly. Many species remembered their own first contact with galactic civilization. It was usually a slow process of learning and adaptation that took centuries. But the humans were different, Zeftai continued. They did not just learn our technology, they improved it. Within their first decade in galactic society, they had developed faster engines, more efficient power sources, and manufacturing techniques that made our own seem primitive. The murmur grew louder. Several representatives exchanged worried glances. Within 20 years, they had established colonies on a dozen worlds. Their population grew at an incredible rate, and their expansion showed no signs of slowing. They did not conquer other species, but they did not need to. They simply outcompeted everyone else in every field. Marshal Korthax stood up. This explains their advanced technology, but it does not explain why they were removed from our records. Zeftai's energy form flickered with what might have been shame. The removal came later. As the humans continued to advance, the established powers of the galaxy began to see them as a threat. They were too successful, too adaptable, too willing to share their innovations with other species. "Sharing innovations is the foundation of galactic civilization," protested Ambassador Yethma of the Velian Trade Confederation. "Why would that be seen as a threat?" "Because it threatened the existing order," Zeftai replied. For millennia, certain species had maintained their positions through control of technology and resources. The Corvani controlled military hardware. The Etherians controlled communication networks. The Xanthari controlled energy production. Each species had their specialty that gave them power. The chamber grew tense as representatives. began to understand where this was leading. The humans proposed something they called the Unity Accords. Zeftai continued. They wanted to share all technology freely among all species. They wanted to eliminate territorial boundaries and create a true galactic civilization where every being could reach their full potential. That sounds like paradise, whispered someone from the back of the chamber. To us, it sounded like the end of everything we knew, Zeftai admitted. The established powers saw it as a threat to their control. If technology and resources were shared freely, if borders were eliminated, if every species had equal access to advancement, then the old hierarchies would collapse. The silence in the chamber was deafening. Representatives stared at the ancient High Counselor as the full horror of what he was describing began to sink in. So we destroyed them, Zeftai said simply. The major powers of the galaxy coordinated the largest military action in galactic history. We called it the Purge Wars, though the official records were later changed to hide our involvement. Marshal Korthak's metallic features had turned dark with anger. You started a war of extermination because they wanted to help other species? We told ourselves it was necessary, Zeftai replied. We spread propaganda about human aggression and expansion. We claimed they were a threat to galactic security, but the truth is that we feared losing our privileged positions. How long did this war last? Asked Ambassador Yethma. 30 years, Zeftai answered. And it was the most horrific conflict in galactic history. The humans fought with a desperation and ingenuity that none of us had anticipated. When conventional warfare failed them, they developed weapons that could sterilize entire star systems. They turned asteroids into kinetic weapons that could crack planets. They created viruses that could destroy entire ecosystems. The chamber erupted in shocked exclamations. The technology Zeftai was describing was beyond anything currently known to galactic science. But they were still outnumbered 1,000 to 1, Zeftai continued. Eventually, they were forced back to their home system. We prepared for a final assault that would end their species forever. What happened? Marshal Korthax demanded. They activated something they called the Silence, Zeftai replied. Their entire star system simply vanished from all sensors. Every scan showed empty space. Every probe sent to investigate found nothing but dead worlds and cosmic dust. Impossible, breathed the Etherian representative. No technology can create such perfect concealment. The humans could, Zeftai said, and they offered us a deal. They would remain in self-imposed exile, hidden from the galaxy forever. In exchange, we would end the war and leave them alone. We agreed because we had no choice. The cost of continuing the war would have destroyed both sides. And then you erase them from history, Ambassador Yethma said, her voice filled with disgust. We implemented the memory protocols, Zeftai confirmed. All records were purged. All evidence of their existence was eliminated. We told ourselves it was for the good of galactic stability. If future generations learned what we had done, it could destroy the foundations of our civilization. The chamber fell silent again as the representatives processed the full scope of the ancient crime. They had not just committed genocide against an innocent species. They had tried to erase that species from history itself. But now they are returning, Marshal Korthak said. Admiral Thexeler's report shows a civilization more advanced than anything in our current galaxy. What do they want? Zeftai's energy form dimmed even further. I do not know. But the final message we received before they activated the silence contained a warning. They said that if we ever forced them to return to the galaxy, we would face the consequences of our actions. What consequences? Someone called out from the back of the chamber. 800 years of preparation, Zeftai replied. 800 years of technological development by the most innovative species the galaxy has ever known. 800 years of planning for this exact moment. The countdown that Admiral Thexelor had intercepted suddenly took on a new meaning. It was not just the end of their concealment. It was the beginning of their response to 8 centuries of exile. How many of us knew the truth? Asked Ambassador Yethma. Very few, Zeftai answered. The knowledge was passed down through the highest levels of the Council leadership. Most of the galaxy genuinely believes the humans never existed. Then most of the galaxy is innocent of this crime, Marshal Korthak said. Try explaining that to a species that has spent 800 years in exile, Zeftai replied. The humans have had centuries to watch us, to study us, to plan their response. They know exactly who was responsible for their suffering. The chamber erupted in panicked conversations as representatives began to understand the true scope of the crisis. They were not facing an unknown enemy. They were facing the victims of their own ancestors' crimes, armed with technology that could reshape the galaxy. And in less than 7 days, according to the countdown, those victims would emerge from their long exile to deliver whatever justice they had been planning for 8 centuries. The countdown reached 0 at exactly 0800 hours, Galactic Standard Time. Every scanning device, sensor array, and deep space monitor in the galaxy registered the same impossible event at the same moment. The Sol system, which had appeared as empty space for 8 centuries, suddenly blazed to life across every spectrum of detection. But what appeared was not just a star system. It was a sphere of artificial constructs surrounding the entire solar area. Structures so massive they dwarfed entire space stations. For a few moments, the sphere remained solid and impenetrable. Then, like a flower opening to the sun, it became transparent. What lay revealed inside stunned every observer in the galaxy. The Sol system had not just survived 8 centuries of isolation. It had been transformed into something beyond the imagination of any known species. Orbital rings surrounded not just Earth, but every planet and major moon in the system. Space elevators connected worlds to massive orbital platforms. The asteroid belt had become a vast network of interconnected facilities that pulsed with energy. But most shocking of all were the ships. Thousands of vessels filled the space between worlds, vessels that seemed to exist partially outside normal dimensions. They moved through space-time itself, appearing and disappearing as they traveled along routes that violated every known law of physics. Admiral Thexilor watched from his command ship as the human fleet began to emerge from the Sol system. He had seen their constructions before, but seeing them in action was completely different. The ships did not travel in the conventional sense. They simply stopped existing in one location and began existing in another. "Admiral," his communications officer called out, "we are receiving a transmission. It is being broadcast to every ship, station, and communications array in the galaxy simultaneously." "Put it through," Thexilor ordered. The voice that filled his bridge was calm, emotionless, and spoke in perfect galactic standard. "We are the humans of Earth," the voice said. "We remember everything. Every colony you burned, every child you murdered, every lie you told to justify our extinction. You forgot us. We did not forget you." The transmission paused for a moment before continuing. "For 800 years we have watched from the shadows. We have studied your civilizations, your technologies, your strengths and weaknesses. We have seen how you continued to treat younger species the same way you treated us. You have learned nothing." Across the galaxy, representatives of every major species listened in growing horror. "We do not return for conquest," the voice continued. "We return for correction. The galaxy will learn the lessons it should have learned 8 centuries ago. You will understand what it means to face consequences for your actions." The transmission ended, and for a few moments, the galaxy was silent. Then the humans began what they called the correction. The first targets were the Corvani military installations that had led the original assault on human colonies. The massive fortress world of Corvax Prime, which housed the command center for the entire Corvani fleet, simply vanished. One moment it was there, the next it was gone, replaced by empty space and the confused signals of ships that had been orbiting it. But the world had not been destroyed. Long-range sensors detected it in a distant star system, orbiting a dim red star with no other planets. The entire population was alive and unharmed, but they were now stranded on a world with no advanced technology and no way to contact the rest of their civilization. They relocated an entire planet, Admiral Thexilor whispered to his crew. They moved a world across the galaxy like it was a chess piece. The Corvani were not alone. The Etherian homeworld of Atheros found its gravity increased by a factor of 10, making movement almost impossible for its energy-based inhabitants. The Zenthari energy production facilities were simply turned off, leaving their entire civilization without power. But the most precise targeting came against the Galactic Council itself. Every member who had participated in the original Purge Wars found themselves transported to exact replicas of their homeworlds, but with one crucial difference. They were completely isolated from the rest of their species, forced to live alone with only their memories and the knowledge of what they had done. High Counselor Zeftai was one of the few who remained on Nexus Prime when the humans arrived. He floated in the great crystal chamber as a human ship materialized in the space above the planet. The ship did not land or send shuttles. Instead, figures simply appeared in the chamber itself. The humans looked exactly as they had 8 centuries ago, but their technology made them seem like gods. They wore simple clothing, but energy fields surrounded them that suggested capabilities beyond measurement. Their leader, a woman with dark hair and eyes that held the weight of centuries, spoke directly to Zeftai. "High Counselor Zeftai," she said, her voice echoing strangely in the chamber. "You are one of the few who remembers the truth. That is why you remain to witness what comes next. What do you want from us?" Zeftai asked, his energy form flickering with fear. "We want what we always wanted," the woman replied. "A galaxy where every species can reach its full potential. Where technology and knowledge are shared freely. Where the strong protect the weak instead of exploiting them. And if we refuse?" The woman smiled, and it was not a pleasant expression. "You misunderstand. This is not a negotiation. This is an implementation. You had 8 centuries to create the kind of galaxy we proposed in the Unity Accords. Instead, you continued the same patterns of exploitation and control. Around the galaxy, the correction continued with surgical precision. Species that had participated in the Purge Wars found their military capabilities simply removed. Weapons platforms were relocated to empty space. Warships were transported to museum worlds. Soldiers found themselves returned to their home. Planets with their equipment replaced by farming tools, but species that had opposed the wars or had no involvement in them found themselves elevated beyond their wildest dreams. The Valians, whose archivist had helped uncover the truth, discovered new technologies appearing in their research centers. Their scientists were given access to databases that contained solutions to problems they had been working on for centuries. Younger species that had been exploited by the established powers found human advisors appearing to help them develop their own technologies and societies. The Ythrani, who had been kept in technological servitude by the Corvani, suddenly found themselves with the knowledge and tools to build their own starships. The message was clear. Those who had committed crimes would face consequences, but those who were innocent would be helped to thrive. "How is this possible?" Zeftai asked the human woman. "Even with advanced technology, the coordination required to affect the entire galaxy simultaneously should be impossible." "We had 800 years to prepare," she replied. 800 years to develop not just technology, but understanding. We learned to think on a galactic scale. We learned to plan for every contingency. Most importantly, we learned patience. "What happens now?" Zeftai asked. The woman looked around the crystal chamber that had once housed the government of the galaxy. "Now the galaxy learns to grow up. The old systems of control and exploitation are ending. A new age begins, one based on cooperation instead of competition, on sharing instead of hoarding, on justice instead of might. And if some species resist this new age," the woman's expression grew cold. "8 centuries ago, you destroyed our colonies and murdered our children because you were afraid of change. We have not forgotten that lesson. We will not make the same mistake you did." As the humans disappeared from the chamber, leaving Zeftai alone with his thoughts, the ancient Etherian finally understood the true scope of what was happening. This was not conquest or revenge. This was evolution, forced upon a galaxy that had refused to evolve on its own. The age of the old Galactic Council was over. The age of humanity had begun. 6 months after the silence ended, Junior Archivist Kethmar stood in what had once been the Galactic Council chambers on Nexus Prime. The crystal halls were still beautiful, but they now served a very different purpose. Instead of housing political debates and territorial disputes, they had become the central hub of the new Galactic Archive. Kethmar was no longer a junior archivist. The humans had recognized her role in uncovering the truth and had appointed her as the director of historical preservation. Her job was to ensure that the real history of the galaxy would never again be hidden or forgotten. "The transformation has been remarkable," she said to her assistant, a young Ythrani named Korthi, whose species had been elevated from technological servitude to full galactic citizenship in just 6 months. "In less than a year, we have seen changes that should have taken centuries." The changes had indeed been remarkable. The old system of territorial boundaries and resource hoarding had been replaced by something the humans called the Cooperative Development Protocol. Instead of competing for resources, species now work together to develop new technologies and share discoveries. The Velian Trade Confederation had been transformed into a galactic logistics network that could deliver resources to any world within days. The former Corvani military fleets had been converted into exploration and rescue services. Even the Etherians, stripped of their telepathic abilities as punishment for their role in the memory wipes, had found new purpose as philosophers and teachers, but the most dramatic changes had come to the younger species that had been exploited under the old system. Kethmar walked through the archives until she reached the observation deck that looked out over the main plaza. Below, she could see representatives from dozens of species working together on projects that would have been impossible under the old galactic order. The Uthrani were collaborating with human engineers to build faster-than-light communication networks that would connect every inhabited world in the galaxy. The Zalani, who had been kept as agricultural laborers for centuries, were now developing new farming techniques that could feed entire civilizations. The Morith, former mining slaves, had become the galaxy's leading experts in planetary engineering. How did they do it so quickly? Korthi asked. 800 years of established systems changed in just 6 months. It should have been impossible. Kethmar smiled. They had 8 centuries to plan for this exact situation. Every detail was prepared in advance. They knew exactly what changes needed to be made and how to implement them. But the success of the transition was not just due to human planning. It was also due to their restraint. The species that had expected conquest and destruction had instead found themselves faced with beings who seemed more interested in teaching than ruling. The former leaders of the galactic powers had expected to be executed or imprisoned. Instead, they found themselves in comfortable but isolated facilities where they were required to study the history of their own crimes and write detailed reports on how their societies could be reformed. Haitu, Counselor Zeftai, was one of the few former leaders who had been allowed to remain free. His 1,000 years of life and his role in finally revealing the truth had earned him a place in the new galactic government. But his position was very different from his old role. Instead of making political decisions, he now served as a historical consultant, helping younger species understand how the old systems had worked and why they had failed. It was, he admitted to himself, a more satisfying job than ruling had ever been. The most impressive aspect of human governance is how little governing they actually do, Zeftai explained to a group of young diplomats from various species. They do not impose their will on other species. Instead, they create conditions where the natural development of those species leads to the outcomes they desire. The diplomats, representing a dozen different worlds and species, listened carefully. They were all part of the new Galactic Development Council, the organization that had replaced the old power structure. For example, Zeftai continued, the humans wanted the Corvani to abandon their military culture and focus on exploration. They did not simply order this change. Instead, they removed the Corvani military's ability to function as conquerors, while providing them with better opportunities as explorers. The Corvani made the choice themselves, but the humans had arranged the situation so that choice was obvious. One of the young diplomats, a Corvani named Vexnor, raised his hand. But what about species that refuse to cooperate? What about those who resist the new order? Zeftai's expression grew serious. There have been some who tried to resist. The results have been instructive. The lesson had come early in the transition period. A group of former military commanders from several species had attempted to organize a rebellion against human authority. They had gathered weapons, recruited followers, and prepared to launch attacks on human facilities. The rebellion had lasted exactly 47 minutes. The human response had been swift and absolute. The rebel leaders had found themselves transported to a small moon, orbiting a distant star. The moon was perfectly habitable, with clean air and water and abundant food sources. But it was also completely isolated from the rest of the galaxy. The rebels were not harmed, imprisoned, or executed. They were simply removed from galactic society and left to think about their choices. The message to other potential rebels was clear. Resistance would not be met with violence, but it would be met with consequences. The humans have demonstrated something that our species never understood, Zeftai continued. True power is not the ability to destroy your enemies. It is the ability to make having enemies unnecessary. The success of the human approach could be seen throughout the galaxy. Trade disputes that had lasted centuries were resolved within weeks when all species had access to the same resources. Territorial conflicts ended when the concept of territorial boundaries became meaningless. Even ancient grudges began to fade when the species involved found themselves working together toward common goals. But perhaps the most significant change was in how the galaxy viewed itself. Keth Mar had spent her career studying galactic history, and she understood better than most how the old system had worked. It had been based on competition, scarcity, and fear. Species had fought over limited resources and had maintained their positions through military force and political manipulation. The new system was based on abundance, cooperation, and mutual development. The humans had not just advanced technology beyond anything previously known. They had advanced philosophy and social organization as well. The old galaxy was like a family where the children constantly fought over their parents' attention, Kethamar explained to a visiting group of historians from various species. The new galaxy is like a classroom where the teacher helps every student reach their full potential. The transformation was not complete, and it would not happen overnight. Centuries of established thinking could not be changed in just a few months, but the progress was undeniable. Species that had been enemies for millennia were now collaborating on joint projects. Technologies that had been closely guarded secrets were now shared freely. Young beings from hundreds of worlds were studying together in integrated schools and universities. Most importantly, the galaxy was expanding in ways that had never been possible under the old system. Human dimensional technology had opened up entire new realms for exploration and development. Species no longer had to compete for living space when infinite alternate dimensions were available for colonization. As Kethmar stood in the archives, surrounded by the true history of the galaxy, she reflected on how much had changed since she had first discovered those corrupted files about the mysterious humans. The species that had been erased from history had returned to become the architects of the galaxy's future. The victims of an ancient genocide had chosen not revenge but rehabilitation. The exiles had returned not as conquerors, but as teachers. And in doing so, they had finally achieved what they had proposed 8 centuries ago with the Unity Accords. The galaxy had become a true civilization where every species could reach their full potential. The age of fear and competition was over. The age of cooperation and growth had begun, and it had all started with a young archivist who had refused to let the truth remain buried in corrupted files. The galaxy would never forget again, because now it had teachers who would never let it.